Affirmative and negative sentences in the present tense except the verb be.
Present tense versus present time. Present tense, this term should be thought of more as a label and not that it necessarily indicates the actual time being referred to. The problem is that this form for most verbs does not usually refer to the moment of speaking or the moment of writing. It doesn't refer to that moment. If you want to refer to the moment when the person is speaking or writing, then with most verbs we use a different form. In fact, in most cases, the present tense form tells more about the past and future and tells less about the moment when the person is speaking or the moment when the person is writing. Now, there are some verbs that when we use them in this form uh, do and can refer to the exact moment when the person is speaking or writing. So it's a little bit confusing, but in general, with most verbs, this form does not tell you what is occurring at that moment that the person is speaking, or in the case of writing, at the moment when the person is writing. Now, because this tells more about past and future, this form is often used to indicate current habits, customs, or routines. For example, John wakes up at 6 a.m. every day. John wakes up at 6 tell me what is happening at this moment. It tells me what John did, and it tells me what John probably will continue to do. So it tells me more about the past and the future and does not tell me what is occurring at the moment when I say that or the moment when I write that. Another example, if I say Betty works in Kmart, Betty works in Kmart does not tell me what Betty is doing. It tells me that she did work there and it implies that she will continue to work there. So it tells me more about the past and the future, but does not tell me what she's doing at this moment. Part of the situation here is the concept of present time. In fact, there are different kinds of present. That is, there are different present times. There's what I call the immediate present, right now, at this moment. But you can think of something like today as being the present. But today includes the time that has passed already today and the time yet to come today. That is, as I'm speaking or writing, I'm only a part of today. Part of it is yet to come. This week, we can think of this week as being, in a sense, present. Again, this week contains days that have passed and days that have yet to occur. So the term this week, although present, is referring to time in the past and time in the future. As with other expressions like this month or this year or this term or this school year. So, in a sense, there are different chunks of present. We can think of present as containing different amounts of time. From the immediate present, right now, this moment, to this morning, today, this week, this month, this year, this century. um, Different ways to think of the present time. In most cases, our concept of present time includes some past and some future. there. So even if we refer to today, for example, today includes, as I mentioned, some past and some future. Exactly how much past and future you include in the concept of present, and remember there are different concepts of present, makes this all confusing. And it even leads us to use this form of the verb to refer to some things that are in a sense eternal or extremely long lasting. So that when we're referring to something that we believe is sort of an eternal truth or a truth that has lasted for a long time and which we believe will continue to last for an extremely long time, then we use this form. So in the example, the moon revolves around the earth, well, from what we know, that has been happening for millions of years, and we hope it will continue for millions of years. So we use the term revolve there in present form, not because it's referring to this moment, although at this moment it is happening, but because it includes this idea of past into the future. Another example I would like to use is scientific information. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you prefer, 0 degrees Celsius. When someone says water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, they are telling you what it did in the past, at least on Earth, and what we assume it will continue to do. We believe that it will continue to freeze at 32 degrees. So a sentence like water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, a statement about something we believe is in a sense eternal. So this form of the verb is used to indicate habits, customs, routines in the present, whatever that means. Okay. Um, and it's also used to refer to things that are, if not eternal truth, at least things that we believe have been true for an extremely long time and we believe will continue to be true for a long time. Um, if you want to refer to something that is occurring at the moment that you are speaking or writing, then you need to use a different form of the verb. Affirmative word order in the present tense for all verbs except the verb be. In English, in the present tense, verbs have two forms except be, which has three, am, is, and are. These forms in English are used to indicate what we refer to as person and number. English had other ways to indicate other person number relationships, but over time they were lost. And the only one that remains today is one that is used to indicate what we refer to as third person singular present tense. The use of different suffixes to indicate the different person number relationships is quite common. For example, in Spanish, we have different forms of the verb depending on the subject. Trabajo, trabajas, trabaja, trabajamos, trabajáis, trabajan. These are variations on the verb trabajar in the present to indicate its relationship with the subject. In English, we retain one of these. When the subject is third person singular, that is, when the subject refers to one person or one thing, and that person is not the person speaking or writing, or not the person being directly spoken to or written to, then we put a suffix on the main verb in the present tense to indicate this relationship. So notice Nancy, one person, not the person speaking or the person being spoken to. Nancy eats spaghetti. Bill and I, we have two people, so Bill and I work in San Juan. You, addressing a person directly, you play the piano. He, again, third person singular, a person being referred to who's not the person speaking or the person being addressed. He washes his car on Saturdays. And the final example, the students do their homework. In addition to the two different forms, notice that the order of words, the common order of words in an affirmative sentence in the present is um, basically subject, then the main verb, and then the rest of the sentence. This is the typical word order for affirmative sentences in English. The spelling and pronunciation of this third person singular form can be a bit confusing. We have at least three different pronunciations, and we have two basic different spellings, but then we have some modifications of spelling rules there. The pronunciations, the three common pronunciations of this suffix are s, z, and is or uz. If the word ends in a final sound that has no vibration, that is a sound where if you put your hand on your throat, you feel very little vibration. For example, the k in make, k, or the t in eat, eat. Then we add s. So make, makes, eat, eats, cough, coughs, chop, chops. So most words that end in a sound with no vibration, we add s. There is an exception to in a moment. If the word ends in a sound where the vocal cords, that is, if you put your hand on your throat, you feel considerable vibration. If the word ends in a sound with a lot of vibration, then with one exception, we add the z sound. So the final sound g as in drag, or d as in send, or give, the v in give. So drag, drags, send, sends, give, gives, rob, robs, run, runs, etc. Now, if the final sound is a sound that some people call a hissing sound, these sounds would be s, z, sh, zh, ch, j. If it ends in one of those sounds, then we add another syllable. So examples would be wish, wishes, miss, misses, judge, judges, watch, watches. So three different pronunciations for this suffix. There are a few forms that are irregular in spelling, like has and does and goes. But there are two basic ways to spell this, with an S or sometimes an ES. Now, in most cases, we simply add an S to the word in spelling, in a consonant letter or in a vowel letter. The main exception is if the word in pronunciation ends in a hissing sound. Again, those would be s, z, sh, zh, j, ch, ch. If it ends in one of those sounds and the final letter in the spelling of the word is not a vowel letter, then we add es. So wish, wish, and then wishes, wishes. So if the final letter is not a vowel letter and it ends in one of those sounds, s, z, sh, zh, ch, j, then we add es in spelling. The other important spelling rule is that if the verb ends in the letter y, and if that y is preceded by one or more consonant letters, that is, if before the letter y you have a consonant letter, then we change the y to an I and then we add es. For example, cry, cry, we change the y to I and add es, cries. Study, study, studies, studies. Okay. Now this only happens if the letter y is preceded by a consonant. If you look at the last example in the middle column, the verb enjoy, the y is preceded by a letter, so we don't change that y to an I. So this third person singular form is a little confusing because we have different pronunciations for the form and we have some variant spelling rules. So it makes it a little bit complicated. You would need to practice speaking and or writing to get a sense of this and develop the ability to predict which pronunciation to use and also which spelling to use if you're writing. In the present tense, when you want to make a sentence negative, if it does not have the verb be, that is, if it does not have am or is or are, then we must add an auxiliary. We must add do or does. After we add the auxiliary, then we place the word not. So if you look at the sentences in the affirmative and the negative, in the first example, Nancy likes spaghetti. We have nothing in the do does position and nothing in the not position because it is an affirmative sentence. In the negative, we need to place the word not after an auxiliary. Since there is no auxiliary in the affirmative, we have to put in do or does. Since we have Nancy, which is what we call third person singular, after Nancy we need the form does. Then we insert not, and then we get the verb like and the rest of the sentence spaghetti. So in the negative we get Nancy does not like spaghetti. Notice that the S that was on likes in the affirmative form now is on does in the negative form. You can only have that S suffix one time, so if you put it on does, you do not put it again on the verb like. If you have a subject that is anything other than third person singular, that is, anything that does not take he or she or it, then we use do. We place not after do. So we need the do so that we can put not after it. And then we get the verb. If you look at the second example here, in the affirmative, you live in Caguas. We have nothing in the do position because we don't have a negative not. In the negative, we get you do not live in Caguas. we need the auxiliary do because we need to put the word not after an auxiliary, unless you have am, is, or are. So we get you do not and then the verb live in Caguas. Now, since the verb live in the affirmative did not have the s, in the negative we get do not. The use of do and does can sometimes be a little bit confusing because these words are really empty words. They don't really have any meaning. We use them because of syntax, because of grammar. So if you try to translate them, you're going to have a problem because they are empty words. They function in our syntax, but they don't really have meaning, so you can't translate them there. And so it's better to try to think in English because if you think in Spanish, it's going to cause some difficulty there. Also remember that does not can be contracted to doesn't, and do not can be contracted to don't. In present tense, we also have negative contractions with the auxiliary do and does. In first person with I do not, we get the contraction don't. I don't. In the second person with you singular and do not, we also get don't. You don't. In third person with he or she or it, we get does not. Does not contracts to doesn't. So we get he doesn't, she doesn't, it doesn't. In plural, in first person plural with we get do not. So do not again contracts to don't. We don't. You plural plus do not produces the same as you singular plus do not. We get the contraction you don't. And then third person plural, they plus the negative do not, we get they don't. Now, it's also possible to have a name before the contraction doesn't. So we could say instead of she doesn't, Mary doesn't. Instead of he doesn't, you could have the name of a male, John. John doesn't. Mr. Smith doesn't. And instead of it, you could have the name of a thing, the car. The car doesn't. The car doesn't work. And in plural, where we have don't, we can also have, instead of they, the names of people. For example, Mary and John don't. The students don't. Or a reference to some things. For example, cars. Cars don't. All right? So it's not only with pronouns that you can use contractions. We can use them with other words. And finally, you should note that negative contractions can be used at the end of a sentence. Affirmative contractions cannot, but negative contractions can be used at the end of a sentence.